The Old, Bull Chapter 3, The Eyes That See, The Ears That Listen, Part 1, The New Village. The sun had not yet reached its peak when Ananda arrived at the village. He had walked the entire morning, no goal, no destination, just following the path that wound through the hills, down into the valley where the village lay hidden among trees. It was a quiet place. As far as villages go, the air here was cooler, the soil softer. There were no loud voices, no bustling markets, only the soft murmur of distant conversation carried by the wind as he entered the village. He noticed how still everything was. The houses were built close together, nestled in the shade of old, towering trees. The roofs were thatched, the walls made of mud and straw. There was a sense of simplicity, of something unhurried, like the village itself had found its place in time and had decided to stay there, untouched by the rest of the world. A woman came out of a nearby house. She was older than Ananda, her skin darkened by the sun, her face lined with years of care. She was carrying a basket of fruit, though it seemed like she had no real purpose for carrying it, simply walking, moving with a rhythm that matched the land. She looked at Ananda for a moment, eyes soft, as if she had known he would come. "Welcome," she said simply, her voice gentle, almost like a sigh. Ananda bowed slightly, his hands pressed together in greeting. "Thank you," he replied. She smiled and nodded, then turned and walked into the house, leaving Ananda to continue his quiet walk through the village. It was then that he noticed the silence. The villagers moved quietly, speaking in low tones, as if they were trying not to disturb something. Even the children played without shouting, their laughter soft and slow, like a river flowing gently through an open field. But there was something else here, something more than just the peaceful quiet. Ananda could feel it. The village felt as if it were waiting for something to happen, or perhaps waiting for someone to notice. He stopped in the center of the village square, looking around at the faces of the people who had gathered there. They looked at him curiously, but without urgency. The elderly woman, the children, the young man sitting on a bench, they all looked at him with a quiet understanding. It was as if they knew he was here for something, but they did not need to ask what that something was. He realized then, they were not waiting for him to speak. They were waiting for him to see. A young man stood from a bench nearby, walking toward Ananda. His face was calm, but there was a weight in his eyes, a kind of searching that Ananda recognized. He had seen it in his own eyes when he was younger. The young man did not speak at first, just stood there, looking at Ananda, as if waiting for him to say something, but Ananda said nothing. They stood in silence, each waiting for the other to begin. It was the young man who spoke first, but his words were slow, measured, as if each syllable was weighed with care. "You've come from far," he said, his voice steady. Ananda nodded, "Yes, from the river, from the mountain." The young man continued, "And yet you say nothing. You carry nothing." Ananda looked at him, searching his face for the unspoken question, but found none, only quiet curiosity. "I carry only what remains," Ananda replied, his voice soft. The young man furrowed his brow. "And what remains? That which cannot be taken," Ananda said simply. The young man did not respond immediately. He looked down, his gaze resting on the earth between them. There was a pause, a long pause, filled with the weight of things unsaid. Then, with a quiet nod, the young man sat back down on the bench, looking out at the distant horizon. Ananda joined him, sitting silently beside him. The village had already begun to settle into its quiet rhythm again, the moment of exchange passing as quickly as it had come. Ananda stayed in the village for several days. During that time, he met others, the woman with the basket of fruit, the elderly man who sat by the well, the young girl who watched him from the edge of the trees. Each one greeted him with a quiet warmth, as if they had all been waiting for him to arrive, but did not need to ask why. There was no rush to speak, no urgency to act. They lived their lives in a soft, slow rhythm, like the land itself. It was in these moments of stillness that Ananda began to understand something deeper, that the village, though full of people, was not full of noise. It was full of listening. The people here did not need words to know each other. They did not need to fill every silence with sound. Instead, they waited, they listened, and in the listening, they knew one another in a way words could never express. By the end of the week, Ananda had come to understand that the village was not merely a place of quiet. It was a place of being. It was a place where each person's presence was enough, and in the quiet, he found something he had not expected. Nothing needed to be said. As he walked to the edge of the village one final time, Ananda stopped and turned to look back at the people he had met. They were still there, standing in the same quiet way, looking at him with the same unspoken understanding. He bowed to them, not with his head, but with his heart, and then he continued on his way, without a word. Part 2 *. The unspoken teachings. Ananda walked slowly from the village, his feet following the familiar path that wound its way toward the hills. The landscape around him was gentle, the soft curve of the land, the distant hum of the trees, the quiet melody of the wind. But even in the silence, he felt a new awareness inside of him. It was as if the village had opened a door, and now he was walking through it, into a new kind of understanding. As he reached the edge of the village, he noticed something strange. The people he had met during his stay were still there, watching him. They weren't following him. They weren't even calling after him. They simply watched. Ananda paused for a moment and looked back at them. There was no need for words, no need for explanation, just the simple act of seeing. He realized then that he was not leaving the village behind. It was inside him now, and somehow it always would be. His next stop was a small grove of trees just beyond the village. The air here was cooler, shaded by tall oaks and willows that swayed gently in the breeze. The ground was soft with moss and leaves, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. As Ananda walked deeper into the grove, he saw a figure sitting beneath a tree, a man older than him, with a long white beard and tattered robes. The man was gazing up at the sky, his eyes closed, his hands resting on his knees in a meditative posture. Ananda approached him quietly, not wanting to disturb the peace of the moment. But the man opened his eyes and looked at him as if he had known Ananda was coming. "Ah," the man said softly, "I've been expecting you." Ananda raised an eyebrow. "Expecting me?" The man nodded. "Not you specifically, but someone who seeks, who listens. It is always the same in the end." Ananda sat beside the man, keeping a respectful distance. "You seem to know something," Ananda said, "but I don't know what." The man smiled, though it was a smile filled with quiet wisdom. "Do you know the sound of a leaf falling from a tree?" Ananda frowned. "The sound of a leaf falling? Of course, I know the sound. It's a soft, rustling sound." The man's eyes twinkled. "But do you know what the leaf is doing when it falls?" Ananda was silent for a moment, thinking. It's falling, moving through the air until it touches the ground. Yes, the man said. But is it falling because it wants to? Or is it simply falling because that is its nature? Ananda looked at the ground beneath them, his mind turning the question over. I see, he said slowly. It falls because it is in its nature to fall. It does not choose to fall. It simply does. The man nodded, his smile deepening. And that is how you should live. Not choosing, not striving, not chasing, but simply being. Ananda sat in silence, absorbing the man's words. He had heard teachings like these before, but there was something about this moment, sitting in the quiet grove with this man, that made the lesson feel different, real, not just a teaching to memorize, but a teaching to live. They sat in silence. For a long time, the breeze moved through the trees, and Ananda closed his eyes. He could feel the rhythm of the world around him, the rustle of the leaves, the shifting of the air, the deep hum of the earth beneath him. At some point, the man spoke again. There is nothing to chase, he said, his voice gentle. Not wisdom, not peace, not happiness. If you search for them, you will never find them. But if you stop looking, you may find that they have always been here. Ananda took a deep breath, realizing that this was the teaching he had been waiting for, not to seek the truth, but to be with the truth. As the day began to fade into twilight, the man stood up slowly and stretched. I will leave you now, he said. But remember, the path is always open. It is up to you whether you walk it. Ananda nodded, his heart full. Thank you, he said, though he knew the words were not enough. The man smiled again, as if understanding the silence between them, and walked into the grove, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Ananda remained where he sat for a long time, watching the sky change colors, the sun sinking slowly into the horizon. He felt the deep quiet of the evening, the stillness of the earth, the peace of the moment, and he realized that this was all there was. This moment, this breath, this presence. He did not need to understand everything. He did not need to explain it. He simply needed to be with it. Later that evening, as the stars began to appear above him, Ananda stood and began to walk again. This time there was no urgency, no goal, just the soft rhythm of his steps, and as he walked, he noticed something else. The village was still with him, inside him. The people, the quiet, the teachings, they were all a part of him now. And in that moment, Ananda understood that the village was not a place to find. It was a place to remember. Part 3 *. The sound of silence. The road ahead of Ananda stretched wide, disappearing into the soft haze of morning fog. The quiet that surrounded him was deep, not empty, but full, as though the air itself was breathing with him. It was a silence he had come to recognize, a silence that was not merely the absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper. As Ananda continued his walk, he met no one for many hours. The world around him was alive in its own way, but it did not demand attention. The trees whispered, the river murmured in the distance, and the breeze shifted gently through the tall grass. But it was not loud, it was not insistent. It was simply there, like an old friend who did not need to speak, but whose presence was enough. He arrived at a small clearing by late afternoon, where the land sloped gently down toward a wide river. The water was calm here, reflecting the colors of the sky, the surrounding trees, and the occasional bird that passed overhead. There were no sounds of people, no chatter, no rush, just the world as it had always been, waiting as he sat by the river. Ananda closed his eyes, his hands resting in his lap. The silence around him deepened, and he sank into it, not seeking anything, not trying to reach some place of peace, but simply letting himself be with the silence. It was not uncomfortable, not empty. It was full of life, full of possibilities. Though none of them were urgent, a soft rustling interrupted his thoughts. He opened his eyes slowly. A figure had emerged from the trees. It was a woman, not young but not old either, with a quiet strength in her bearing. Her eyes were steady, her expression calm but curious, as though she had been walking this path for much longer than he had. She did not speak at first, just stood a few feet away, observing him. Ananda regarded her quietly, noticing how her presence seemed to fill the space without crowding it. Her stillness was not passive. It was alive, vibrant, and grounding. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "You have found it, haven't you?" she asked. Ananda did not immediately respond. He was unsure of what it was, but he nodded slightly. "Found what?" he asked gently. She smiled, a knowing smile. "The stillness, the space between thoughts." Ananda thought for a moment. "Yes," he said slowly, "but it is not found. It is here." The woman nodded in understanding. "Yes," she agreed, "that is what I have been looking for too. But the searching, it only takes us farther from it. The stillness is not outside of us. It is not a place we need to go. It is simply a way of being." Ananda met her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. After some time, the woman sat down beside him. The space between them, respectful but comfortable. They both watched the river, the water flowing quietly before them. "You have lived much of your life seeking," the woman said after a while. "Do you still seek?" Ananda considered her question. "Yes," he replied, "but not the way I used to. I no longer seek answers. I seek to see, to simply see without judgment, without expectation." The woman smiled softly. "That is the beginning. To see without the need to change what is. To listen without the need to interpret." They sat in silence for a long time, letting the world pass by them. No words were needed, only the mutual understanding of two people who had both traveled long paths and were now, somehow, here as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The woman stood. "I must go now," she said quietly, "but remember this moment. The silence you feel now, it is always with you. It is not something to be lost or found. It is the space you live in." Ananda nodded, and as she turned to leave, he spoke one final word: "Thank you." The woman turned to him, her smile full of grace. "It is not I you must thank," she said. "It is the silence." And with that, she walked back into the trees, leaving Ananda alone once more by the river. The night fell softly, like the closing of a book, and Ananda sat with the silence, feeling it envelop him, feel his every breath, his every thought. But now there was no urgency, there was no question. There was only this moment, unfolding as it should, as it always had. As he prepared to sleep beneath the stars, that night, Ananda felt a deep peace. It was not the peace that comes from understanding, but the peace that comes from simply being, and in that peace, he understood something important. There is nothing to seek and nothing to find. It is all here, waiting. The moment is always enough. Part 4 ***. The quiet Pathananda continued his journey, the road leading him through fields of tall grass. over hills where the wind whispered secrets, and into quiet forests where light barely touched the ground. The days passed slowly, and in each of them he felt the weight of his presence, not as a burden, but as a freedom. There was no longer any need to search, only to be dot. By the time the sun began its descent into the horizon, Ananda found himself near a small, dusty village. It was quiet here as well, but there was a restlessness in the air, a sense of something unsaid that lingered between the villagers. He noticed the way the people moved, their eyes averted, their shoulders tense, as if something was weighing heavily on their hearts. Ananda walked quietly through the village, taking note of the subtle undercurrent of discomfort. The villagers went about their tasks, but there was a palpable sense of unease that seemed to hang in the air. He stopped when he reached a small tea stall at the edge of the village. An older man, his face lined with age and worry, was sitting behind the stall, stirring a pot of tea. "Will you join me for tea?" the man asked, his voice soft but filled with a kind of weary warmth. Ananda nodded and sat down across from him. The man poured tea into 2 small cups, his hands trembling slightly, as he offered one to Ananda. "Thank you," Ananda said, accepting the cup. For a few moments they drank in silence. The tea was warm, the taste earthy, like the soil that had nurtured the plants. Ananda could feel the presence of the old man, his quiet grief, his unspoken pain. At last, the old man set his cup down and looked at Ananda. "You must have come from far," he said, his voice low. "I have walked many roads," Ananda replied simply. The man nodded, his eyes distant. "I can see it in your face. You have been on a long journey, but I wonder, have you found what you seek?" Ananda did not answer immediately. He took a slow sip of his tea, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. "I have found what I did not know I was looking for." The man's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Ananda set his cup down and looked the old man in the eye. "I was searching for something once, peace, understanding, answers. But I learned that searching itself causes pain. To seek is to acknowledge the absence of what we already have. We already have peace. We already have everything we need. It is just a matter of stopping the search and allowing ourselves to be." The old man stared at him as if he had never heard such words before. "But I am in pain," he said softly. "I cannot let go of the pain of my life, the regrets, the losses." Ananda nodded. "We all carry pain, but pain is not something we need to hold on to. It is something we need to feel, to acknowledge, and then to release. If we refuse to let go, it will continue to define us. But if we allow ourselves to feel it and then release it, we can move forward." The man sat back, his hands trembling slightly as he held his cup. He looked down into it as if searching for something. "But how do I release it?" he asked quietly. Ananda leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "You don't need to release it with force. You simply need to stop holding it. Let it pass through you like the wind. Feel it, acknowledge it, and then let it go. Holding on to it only makes it heavier. When you stop holding, it will be free." The old man looked at him, his eyes full of doubt and sorrow. "And if I let it go, what will remain?" Ananda smiled gently. "Everything that matters." The old man was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the ground before him. He took a deep breath, as though trying to find the words to say. At last, he spoke. "I have never thought of it that way," he said softly. "I have spent my whole life trying to escape my pain, but I have never thought of just letting it pass through me." The sun was setting as they sat in silence. the village around them fading into the quiet of evening. Ananda stood up, his heart filled with a quiet peace. "Thank you for your company," he said, bowing slightly to the old man. The man nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and understanding. "And thank you for your words," he said, his voice steady now, as though something heavy had been lifted from his shoulders. Ananda left the tea stall, feeling the weight of the world ease a little more with each step he took. He had not given the old man any answers, but he had shared something far more powerful, the space to release, the space to breathe as he walked away from the village. The evening air cool against his skin, he felt a deep peace settle in his chest. It was not the peace of having found something, it was the peace of having let go. As Ananda continued walking through the countryside, the stars began to appear, scattered across the sky like scattered thoughts. He looked up at them, feeling no need to understand them, no desire to figure them out. They simply were. Part 5. The heart of the journey. Ananda continued his walk through the countryside, the path winding gently along the river, the trees standing tall on either side like silent witnesses to his journey. The air had cooled as evening settled, and the stars had begun to pierce the dark sky above him, flickering like the tiny sparks of an ancient fire. He had learned much in the past days. The villagers he had met, the quiet moments shared, the conversations without words, all of it had been a lesson in something simpler than he had ever imagined. As he walked, he encountered a group of travelers coming toward him. They were a diverse group, a man and woman, both dressed in simple worn clothing, an elderly woman walking with a cane, and a young boy who looked no older than 12. They appeared tired, worn by their own journey, but their eyes were bright with the same quiet curiosity Ananda had seen in the faces of those who had walked before him. When they saw him, they stopped, as if unsure whether to approach. Ananda smiled gently and nodded. "You are welcome," he said simply. The man stepped forward, his face lined with worry. "We are lost," he said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We have been walking for days, and we do not know the way. Do you know the path?" Ananda paused for a moment, considering the question. He could see the weariness in their faces, the sense of being lost not just on the road, but in something deeper. "The path is always open," he said softly. "The question is not where it leads, but how you walk it." The woman next to the man frowned slightly. "How we walk it?" Ananda nodded. "Yes, many people walk a path, but they do not walk it with awareness. They are distracted by the destination, by the desire to reach somewhere. But the path, the journey itself, is the most important part." The elderly woman, who had been silent until now, leaned on her cane and looked at Ananda with eyes that had seen much. "But we are tired," she said quietly. "We are weary from the journey. How can we walk without a destination? How can we find peace when we do not know where we are going?" Ananda looked at her, his gaze steady but gentle. "Peace is not something you find when you reach a place. It is something you carry with you, not in the future, but in the present moment. If you are looking for peace, you will never find it in the distance. You must find it in the step you are taking now." There was a long silence as the group absorbed his words. The young boy, who had been quiet up until this point, looked at Ananda with wide, wondering eyes. "You mean we should stop looking for a place to go?" the boy asked softly, "and just be where we are?" Ananda smiled warmly. "Yes, little one. The most important place is the one you are in now. You have already arrived. There is nowhere else to go." The travelers exchanged looks, some of them uncertain, others starting to understand. The elderly woman let out a sigh, her face softening. "You speak of a peace I have not known," she said, her voice tinged with wonder. "I have been searching. For so long I forgot what peace felt like." Ananda bowed his head slightly. "We all search for peace, but the search often takes us away from it. Peace is not something to find, it is something to allow." The man, who had been listening intently, looked at Ananda with a deep, searching gaze. "But what if we cannot find peace because of our suffering? What if the pain is too great?" Ananda was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Suffering is not something to be avoided. It is part of the journey. When we try to run from it, it only follows us. But when we embrace it, when we allow it to be part of us, it loses its power over us. The young boy who had been listening, with rapt attention, spoke again. "So, we don't have to fight our pain, we can just feel it." Ananda nodded. "Yes, pain is not the enemy, it is a messenger. When you feel pain, you are not broken. You are being shown something about yourself, something you need to understand." The woman stepped forward, her eyes bright with understanding. "So, if we stop running from the pain, we can find peace." Ananda smiled, his eyes soft with compassion. "Exactly. Peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence of awareness in the midst of it." The group stood there in silence for a moment, letting the words settle into them. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the stars were now shining brightly above them, casting a soft glow over the path ahead. The man looked at Ananda with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "Thank you," he said simply. "You have given us more than we could have hoped for." Ananda nodded, his heart full. "The path is always open to you. You are already on it." With that, the travelers continued on their way, their steps lighter than before, their hearts filled with a new understanding of peace. Ananda watched them go for a moment before turning back to the path ahead. He had not given them anything but words, but he had shared something far more important, a way of seeing. And in that moment, he realized that this, the quiet presence of being, was enough. He did not need to teach them everything. He only needed to be the silence they sought. Part 6, ***. The final step. The moon hung high in the sky, a pale lantern lighting the path ahead. Ananda walked with no destination, his feet moving naturally, effortlessly, a movement born of deep stillness, of being fully in the present moment. He had walked many roads, crossed many rivers, and met many faces. But now, all those journeys seemed to dissolve into the earth beneath him. He was no longer a traveler. He was simply here. As he continued walking through the vast open land, the landscape shifted once more. The rolling hills gave way to a vast plain, the tall grass swaying gently in the wind. The air smelled fresh and pure, untouched by the clutter of civilization. Ananda stopped for a moment, looking out at the horizon where the sky met the earth. For the first time in a long while, he felt complete. He sat down on a patch of soft grass, his back against a small boulder, and closed his eyes. The world continued around him, but he was no longer a part of it in the way he once had been. He was no longer seeking or striving. He was just being. He placed his hands gently on his knees, his palms open, and took a deep breath. As he inhaled, he felt the air fill his lungs, the life force moving through him. And as he exhaled, he felt his body release everything it had been holding, all the tension, the worry, the thoughts that had once consumed him. He had no more questions, no more desires, no more attachment. The only thing that remained was the vastness of the moment, the simplicity of the present. As he sat in that space of stillness, he realized that he had arrived at the place he had been searching for all along. It was not a place in the world. It was a place within himself. He was home. A soft breeze stirred the grass around him, and he opened his eyes. The stars above were brighter than he had ever seen them, and the moon glowed like a gentle reminder of the beauty that existed without effort. The world was perfectly aligned, just as it had always been. Ananda smiled, not with his mind, but with his whole being. There was no need for words. There was no need for explanations. There was only this. As he stood up and began walking once more, he felt no weight in his heart. He was lighter than he had ever been, not because he had left anything behind, but because he had stopped holding on. The path ahead was wide open. The horizon stretched out, not as a place to reach, but as a space to walk in. Every step he took was a step of presence, a step of awareness, a step of acceptance. He knew, deep down, that there would always be more to walk, more to see, more to learn. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the walk itself, the rhythm of each step, the quiet of each breath, the simplicity of being in the world without the need to escape it. And so he continued, moving forward with no goal, no urgency, no fear. He was free. He was home.
you.